Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today about pace and pressure, survival, leadership, and coaching in times of change. My name's Jean Balfour. I run Bailey Balfour, a coach training company, and I'm based in Singapore. And I'm going to share with you some of my thoughts and experience about this in the next 45 minutes. Just a couple of practical things for those of you who are new to GoToWebinar. There are ways that you can interact with me during this session. In a minute, we'll do a poll, and that's one of the ways that you can interact with me. We will also, there's an opportunity for you to ask questions on your panel. On the right-hand side, you will see a place that you can ask questions. The questions don't show up to other people on the webinar, so they're anonymous, and please feel free to ask questions, and I won't say who's asked them, and I will attempt to answer them. First of all, a welcome to everybody joining today. We have people from all around the world. We have people from Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, Bahrain, Malaysia, Thailand, Australia, Vietnam, South Korea, and the United Kingdom. Of course, for those of us in Asia, many of us it's lunchtime. For some of us it's afternoon tea, and for some of us it's the middle of the night. And so you're very welcome to be here today. A little bit about us. We are a coach training company primarily, and we teach people to be executive coaches and are accredited with the International Coach Federation. And I'm happy to see a few people who are training with us on the call today. We also teach leaders coaching skills, and we also provide executive coaching. And in many ways, the topic today has come out of my own conversations with coaching clients and my the stories I hear from people both in the program and friends around the pace and the pressure that it seems to be picking up in organizations. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to look a little bit about what's happening and why is it happening, and then what's the impact of that. We're particularly interested in what's the impact on us, and also then what can we do about it. So let's start with a couple of polls. Let's start with the first poll. I'm wondering whether you've noticed any shift in the pressure and pace in your own organisation. So has it increased a little? Has it increased not at all? Maybe there's been no shift. Maybe that your organisation has become calmer. Has there been a moderate amount of change or a lot of change? So it's great. I can see many people voting. If you haven't voted, if you can jump in and vote now, and then I will close the poll and share the results. Okay, let me close the poll and share the results with you. And wow, a resounding sense for many of you that there's a lot of pressure and pace increasing. And this is what I hear. I'm really happy to see that for some of you, it's not really increased much, or it's a little, and it's moderate. So that is really good. But I'm also seeing that for many of you, that's probably what's attracted you to hearing us talk about it today. Let's have a look at the second poll then, because one of the things I'm curious about is anything happening in your organisation to support people to manage this increased pressure and pace? So what are you seeing around the support? Is there no support at all from the organisation, whatever that is, from leaders, from perhaps HR, other bits of the organisation, or is nothing happening, or a moderate amount, or a lot? Great, and thank you. I can see people voting, so let me close the poll and share the results. Okay, so that's great, actually. That's really heartening that we can see that most organisations, something is happening. There's perhaps a couple where nothing is happening, and some where actually quite a lot is happening. And towards the end of the webinar, I will ask people to share a little bit about your own experience of what works to help people manage the pressure and pace. And some of you will, I'm sure, have some good stories to tell about that. So thank you for sharing that. So let me come on to what I think is going on. I mean, you will know the story well, so I don't need to labour it. First of all, we've been talking about change as a constant for decades now. I mean, I've been working in organisations for a long time, and we talk about change as a constant. I think what's changed is that the pressure and the pace of that change has picked up. And some of that's because organisations have got leaner. There are fewer people doing more roles. We've got at the moment a big sense of the fear around, I think, about the fear of AI, volatile markets. We've just seen market data come out in Singapore this morning that was actually not very positive. So we've got anxiety about that, about trade. We've also got this idea of the workforce of the future, which in some cases we know what that means, in other cases we don't know what that means, but many organisations are looking to reshape around that. And that might be moving people around the globe, moving functions around the globe. And finally, we do have a sense that competition is stronger than ever. So, for example, I do a lot of work in financial services, and we know that fintech companies are seen as a really big threat for financial services for some of the older institutions. And so we see a lot of movement and a lot of change. The other thing we see, and I certainly hear about, is that we can't see very far into the future. So the pace is picking up because people are saying it's changing quickly and we need to change quickly. And I hear often, we don't know what jobs will be around in 5 years' time. Well, 5 years is no time at all, really. So we've got this kind of sense of pace and change happening around us. Many of you will have heard the term VUCA, a VUCA world, and what that means is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In fact, this term was coined just after the Cold War, so it's not a recent term. It's, I think, that as things become more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, we experience it more and we understand a little bit more what it's about. It's, of course, very challenging for leaders to be leading in this world, to be leading in a space that's very ambiguous, that's complex. And it's a requirement, I think, of those of us working in the coaching business to be seeing how we can help leaders to navigate that. The other thing we've got, and I just thought I'd share this, is, of course, AI or robotics. On Monday, I was lucky enough to go to OCBC to attend part of their Future Smart Future Workforce and to meet Nadine, who's a robot and has been working in an insurance company as a customer services agent. And it was my first, I mean, I know a lot about artificial intelligence. It was my first up close and personal encounter with how that is very practically, artificial intelligence and the ability to use robotics is really practically impacting the potential for taking people's jobs. Of course, the presentation of this is that the jobs that AI particularly can take will be those that are task focused and that we still need humans. But how do we help people manage the navigation of that, and how do we manage the pace and pressure of this time? So what's this leading to? Things that you'll know about: an increased amount of pressure. I've talked about that. A lot of people feeling quite threatened, feeling that if they don't keep working at a big pace, that would affect them, and quite a lot of loss of status. We see flattening organisations, people in some cases being demoted, roles being downgraded as organisations are struggling to keep pace with how to manage this. So the curious thing for me as a coach and a facilitator is what's happening to us as individuals and leaders in this experience of this increasing pace. Well, the first thing I see is that I see people retreating into thinking more about themselves and less about the group or their team. I see people taking less time to talk with each other and perhaps less empathy. And that's because as people become frightened, they're more concerned about looking after themselves. We see, as a bit of counter to that, a bit of an increase in emotional behaviour. And I mean in a negative way, in a way, not the kind of good sharing of feelings and emotions, which I'm a huge fan of course, but overplaying those, people being very upset or angry, short with people, perhaps behaving in a way that they may not feel good about afterwards, even themselves. We also see poorer decision making. I was talking with a friend about this, and she was saying that she sees that because there's so much pressure on leaders, decisions are being taken very quickly and not always taking the time to look at the facts and the data. We know from research about bias and decision making that both around people decisions but also business decisions, if we don't step back, those decisions can be poor. Another part of this story is that we see a tendency to react to things rather than responding. You can see a theme here. We tend to come out of our emotion, we tend to move forward and just do what's coming quickly rather than stepping back and thinking about what's best in the whole. And also, we see an increase in negative political behaviour. And I want to tell a bit of a story that kind of brings together the whole of this in my own experience. This happened a long time ago to me, but I was put at risk. We were having an organisation restructure. Everybody on the call is familiar with that. And my job was at risk, and I was competing with another person for my job. And I can tell you, I really wanted that job. It was really important to me, both emotionally, professionally, and of course practically, because I needed the money. And I look back with no sense of pride on how I behaved over that time, because I really started doing these things. I started thinking about myself. I didn't think about the other person involved. She was a perfectly capable, lovely person, but somehow I was really looking out for myself. I was more emotional. And I'm sure in that I also became a bit more political. I know, looking back on it, that I talked to people in a way that was about really making sure I got that job. And I actually think that it wasn't good for me. It was not good for me in a way. And I think we see this in organizations. I hear it from political models. We talk about fox-like behavior, people really looking out for themselves more in that way. So we see this, a real increase of this happening. Some of you will be familiar with the Hogan profile. It's a personality profiling tool. And Hogan has 3 parts to it. And one of those parts is called derailers, career derailers. And they might talk about it as being about the dark side. And the derailers are when our strengths, the things that are our drives, our motivations, our values, get overplayed because we're, as it says, under stress and pressure. And so we start behaving in a way that's not necessarily good, and it sometimes might be a bit career limiting. And of course, the triggers for us to move into our derailers are the things that we've got happening in these high pressure settings. It's things like high stress, or lots of change, or multitasking. This is the blight of the modern age in many ways, and task saturation, having too much to do. So here we are, we've got all of the factors coming together to lead us to the potential to start to move in, to be pushed into our derailers and really not leading and functioning as individuals and leaders at our best, but in fact, perhaps at our worst. So what's going on? I mean, most of you will be familiar with the neuroscience around this because we talk about it a lot. At a very simplistic level, what's happening is that we're forced back into our fight or flight center. We're forced into a space where we go back to our kind of primitive function. We're looking for survival in many ways, survival of ourselves and others. And because of that, we feel like we're at threat, and the trigger of the amygdala is this threat response. And when we're in that space, we don't think clearly, we don't take decisions that are as good, we don't focus as well, we don't notice on what's happening. And the problem with this is that this can build, an amygdala hijack can build. So it can start with a little bit of pressure and pace, but as it increases, we tend to revert back more, and we get more and more disproportionate about reality, perhaps more anxious, perhaps more moody and emotional, perhaps more reactionary. So we head into that space. And the thing that's most important for us to find ways to do, and to find ways to help leaders to do, is to see if we can move back to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, this part of our brain, is where we find our executive function, our ability to think clearly and to focus. And it's when we are able to slightly let go of the emotion and the grip of the amygdala hijack and move back to our prefrontal cortex that we can start to make clearer decisions, that we can start to see where it's appropriate to be emotional and where it's not appropriate to be emotional. So part of our learning and how to deal with and manage this time is to do this, is to learn to really calm the amygdala, if you like, and so it becomes more still and quiet. I was running a workshop on our program on Monday, and we do an exercise that's to do with something called the ladder of inference, which is where we jump to conclusions and usually become a bit emotional about them. And people were invited to think about those situations and then to step back and look at them. And basically what we're inviting people to do is to step back and use their prefrontal cortex. And when the people came back from the exercise, everybody said, I stopped feeling emotional and suddenly I was calm and could make a decision. And so that in many ways is where we're headed. We're wanting to help people to calm, to quieten, so that we can start thinking clearly. Now, just to re-emphasize this, what are some of the triggers for us to head into that amygdala hijack, the fight, flight, freeze, and look at them? They're all of these things that are going on in times of change, a feeling of things being unfair, a lack of respect, a lack of autonomy, the ability to make my own decisions, a lack of status. That is happening in a lot of organisations. Maybe a feeling of incompetence. When we're moving and changing at a big pace, then we often do feel that we are not good enough. We can't do our job properly. We lose connection to purpose, and of course we lose security. So what we're seeing in this pattern is there's a lot of factors that are going to send us all into a bit of an amygdala hijack. In this ability, we perhaps as leaders or as individuals are not functioning at our best. We're caught in our derailers. And so the really important thing is to think about what can we do about it? How can we help ourselves and how can we help people around us? And so what we're seeing is that in times of change, we become basically emotional. And what we want to do is to see how we can ride out the storm and not be caught in the emotional storm. So what can we do about it? Well, at a neuroscience level, very simplistically, it's about looking at this tension between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex helps to regulate the amygdala. It helps to make sense of what's happening, helps to calm it. And so we need to look for ways as coaches, leaders, that we can, as individuals, that we can begin to do that we can make sense of what's happening and that we can regulate the emotion. Many of you will be familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics as a psychologist for his work in thinking about decision-making, and his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is a summary of that work. What he said was we have these kind of two-way methods of thinking. The first is our system one, our fast, intuitive, automatic thinking, located in the brainstem. It's the things that we do on automatic, and it's where we go when we're first of all in the flow sometimes, but also when we're tired and stressed. And system two is our slow, rational, calculated thinking. It's our executive function situated in the prefrontal cortex, and it's where we make our best decisions. It's where we're able to look at things from all angles to analyze effectively. And the problem with system two is it uses a lot of energy. We have to be in a good space to use it. And so what happens is in times of stress and change, it's the same story. We revert to system one, to automatic thinking, and don't make such good decisions. So we need to look for some conditions to help people calm and to help people move back to system two to be able to do that. So here are some ways that I think about this. The first is that I think that in times of pressure and pace, we get caught up in a lot of doing. So we just do. There's so much to do. Our lists are long. We've got demands coming at us from all angles. And so we become very task focused. And what we don't do is we don't step back, take a breath, pause, and look at the whole. We become less able to see the whole picture and what's happening in that. And so for me, I think the first place that we go in these times is to think about stepping back, to be able to look and see. And the first place to start with that is ourselves. There's a lot of research at the moment saying that our emotions are contagious. So in many ways, we have to calm ourselves down before we can possibly help calming anybody else down. And for me, the best strategy is some form of mindfulness practice. For those of you who are new to mindfulness, it's basically putting our attention in the present moment, in the here and now, as Michael Chaskelson says, or it's the quality of our awareness that we pay on ourselves, on others, and the world. And so the first place is to stop and think, where am I and where are others? Because as soon as we do that, come into the present moment, we're beginning to step back and look at this. Now, mindfulness practices had a load of press. It ranges everywhere from doing meditation and full-on meditation practice, sitting quietly with yourself, to other things like exercise, taking things that help bring you into the present moment, sitting calmly, not just sitting calmly, in fact, going for a walk, being in nature, playing music, but anything that brings you into the moment. In organisations, it might just be taking a moment at your desk to take a breath. And the research is really clear about this. There's many studies now. This is one example of a study that looked at people who were on a mindfulness course. And what they saw after 8 weeks of practice was that the amygdala, the fight, flight, fear, shrank, literally physically shrank. And the prefrontal cortex, awareness, concentration, decision-making becomes thicker. So the brain changes when we do this. Of course, this increases our ability to stay calm, to think clearly in times of pressure and pace. Another study by Dr. Amishi Jha, who I see this week has just joined the board of the Google program Search Inside Yourself. And she found that mindfulness increased executive function, working memory, and our focus and mood, and decreased in stress and burnout. Now, I want to be clear here. I believe organisations also need to be doing things to help resolve the pressure and pace. But in the meantime, this is something that we can do to help ourselves to calm and centre and to be able to really manage this pace. So what about helping others recover? What is our role as leaders and coaches in doing that? So for me, the first is calming, because emotion's contagious. If I'm not calm, it's harm for others to be calm around me. The second piece, I think, for me is that as I said earlier, I think that in pressure and pace, what we do is we put so much focus on task and we lose focus on relationship. And by that, I mean connecting with people, taking time to talk, being present in meetings, the things that are going to actually give us the ability to relate, connect, and calm together. And so for me, the task is important. We have to do the task, but I think it's important that we allow a shift back to taking time to be together. I hear great stories of teams who have opportunities where they need to come together for whatever reason. Something's happened and they need to down tools and go and sit in their pantry or go to lunch together. And they say that they often solve a lot of problems in that time because they're sitting, connecting. We are humans. We're programmed to relate to each other. So stepping away from the task and the doing, I think ultimately helps us with the task and the doing, but it helps us by helping us connect, feel whole, and being in relationship. And meetings are a good place for this. Meetings have become incredibly task driven and focused. I was recently in a meeting where, I was an observer, I sit down, we get down to business, and then it's just like this. Everybody's talking over each other. There's so much to be done that it becomes actually a frenzy and another example of the pressure and pace. So I think meetings are one way that we can really help. The first of these is that we can take time at the beginning of a meeting to check in, a really simple round of how are you? How are you feeling? What's going on? We can acknowledge the stresses and talk about them, because that at least helps people not feel so alone and isolated about their feeling of struggling with the pressure and pace. A bit strangely, we can also focus on the positives. About 10 years ago, I was a program manager for the wind down of an organisation. So this, in many ways, would seem a very depressing thing to be doing. Nobody was going to be made redundant, actually, as a result of this, but people had worked in this organisation for a long time, and they were very emotional about it. And so I chose at the beginning of every meeting to ask people to go around the table and say what had gone well in the last week, to look for the positives. And by the end of the program, when the organisation was finished, closed, if you like, had ended, people said that little practice had made a huge impact on their experience, because even in huge times of pressure and pace, things go well, jobs get done, people have good conversations, clients have services delivered and are grateful. And just stopping to talk about those shifts our energy, helps us, again, I think, to step back out of being caught in the amygdala, it's all bad, and step back, calm, and think and see the positives. We can take time to look at the big picture. In times of pressure, we often drill down into details, get down to facts. We don't step back and look at strategy and vision and future and where is this taking us. We can look to be reminded about the purpose of the change, or the purpose of the organisation, or the purpose of the team. That again helps us to connect with ourselves. We can allow time for genuine problem solving. So instead of it having to happen in a hurry, we can say, this is an important decision. Let's not take it without all the data. Let's book an hour. Let's go and sit somewhere different, book a meeting room, go for a walk together and do it. And that, in fact, links to the next point I want to make. We can change our environment. A good friend of mine who works in a very high pressure hospital, has started taking her team, very senior team, including doctors, for a weekly walk together in the park. And they do their meeting while they're walking. And she said it's having a real impact on the outcomes of the work that they're doing together. And of course, we can coach. And the research is very clear about coaching, that it does the things that we need to do in pressure and pace. And of course, when things are pressurized, we don't take time to have coaching conversations, because it feels like that's a nice to have. It can sit over on the side. What's really important is getting the job done. But actually, I noticed for myself that if I have a good conversation with somebody, when I come back to work, I'm more focused. And we can see from research from the ICF, International Coach Federation, that coaching both decreases stress and increases resilience, but also does all the other things that might help us manage through these times of change. And many of you, I know, on the call are HR practitioners, and I think that HR actually can play a very proactive and helpful role. The first of these is really proactively acknowledging the stress and pressure and taking time to have coaching conversations. Asking a leader for coffee, saying, let's just talk. How's it going? How can I help you? Part of that can be about talking with leaders about what strategies do they have personally for their own pause and renewal, whether it's exercise strategies or mindfulness or taking leave, whatever it is. Working on projects that they find fulfilling, even under the pressure, whatever those strategies are, but also how are leaders working with their teams around the pause and renewal. Another role that HR can play, which I always think is helpful, is to take time actually to be the facilitator, to offer, instead of the leaders having to run all the meetings, to step back, to say, why don't I run that meeting for you and facilitate it for you, to offer to do team events, to offer to coach people in the teams. And then also to look at very practical things like what is the organisation offering around things like lunchtime yoga. I've put that in there, but it could be lots of other things that you're doing in your organisations to provide renewal activities. And I want to talk just towards the end of the session about something else that's slightly different. There's been some research done by Lieberman and a few others about talking about our emotions. This isn't really something that we encourage too much in organisations, but this research, let me read the quote to you, says that the results indicated that affect labelling, that's labelling how we feel, diminish the response of the amygdala and the other limbic regions to negative emotional images. Additionally, affect labeling produced increased activity in a single brain function, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, part of the brain associated with executive function. And I think this is something else that we can begin to do. People are talking about how they feel about this with friends, with family, with colleagues, everywhere, but we're not really naming it in the organisation. And this is a wonderful tool developed by Professor Brown, where we just ask people and say, where are you on this spectrum? How do you feel about this pace or change or what's happening to you? Are you angry about it? Do you feel shame because you've been demoted? Are you frightened? Is it working for you? But really asking people just to talk about how they feel actually helps calm. It helps release the emotion, calm, and get back to good decision making and a good place in this. So I think for me, what you're hearing is that I believe that if we take time to talk to each other about how we're feeling, about what's happening, to connect and relate, this can have a huge impact on our ability to manage and navigate this period of change. So these are my few thoughts on managing pace, pressure, and change. But I wondered if you would be willing now to share in the question box, and I'll read the examples out. And also there's an opportunity for you to ask any questions here. What ideas do you have, or what things are your organisations doing to help people during this time? So if you find the question box, it's on the right-hand side. That would be great, and we'll see what is it that you're doing. Somebody shared that there's a Holt TEDx talk by Dr. Amy Armstrong titled The Human Moment, which speaks to these themes. So that's great, thank you. I will certainly be looking that out. That's great. What else are you doing in your organisations to manage this time? Oh, great. So somebody said we're about to offer to purchase Headspace for our team. So Headspace is one of the apps that is available that offers different approaches to mindfulness practice, and is a fabulous tool. It's free to download. At the very basic, it then has things within the app that you can buy. Different meditations, also very good. There are also other apps, another app called Calm, which is very good. Recreational activities, yeah, so taking time, having lunch together is of course a wonderful place to pause and offer that pressure, to take away from the pressure, to step back. Somebody's sharing and saying, always found having someone outside the organisation is really helpful to give a perspective and a filter. I absolutely agree. I think having people we can talk to, I think one of the important things about that is as long as we do that, we choose people to talk to who are going to help us with it, and that it doesn't turn into a kind of, oh, it's all terrible, which is good for a while, but then we need some help. Lunch and learn sessions are coming up. Encouraging HR to start mentorship programs and create individual pods for discussion and rejuvenation. Absolutely. I ran a webinar about a year ago now on peer coaching, where people coach each other. I guess that links to having somebody outside the organisation as well. All of those are really wonderful things to help do it. I know I've got my own peer coaches, trusted colleagues and friends who I talk to that really help me to do that. We've got coffee meetings outside the office, absolutely. And somebody's saying breathing. Yeah, so stopping to breathe from our diaphragm, make sure the brain is getting enough oxygen and is calming. So thank you so much for sharing those. Somebody's got a question here, I think. If somebody said, if staff have decided that they don't want to release the negativity, so they're kind of enjoying sticking with it, I'm guessing that question is, especially if there's no trust in the team. Wow, that's big, and I certainly have been with people around that. We would sometimes call that as a feeling of being a bit toxic, and actually the reason we talk about it being toxic, so that's like a poison, is because it's a bit contagious. Well, I think people have a right to feel how they feel. That's the first thing. I think we are all feeling in that way. I mean, if I'm a leader in that space, I might encourage somebody. I would be coaching them to see if I can help them with it. But if that doesn't help, I guess I might. Wow, it's interesting. I think what I might do is acknowledge that they find it hard, acknowledge that there's a lot of challenge and difficulty there for this person. I might encourage them to make sure they've got somebody to talk to outside the organisation about it. And I would also probably try and contain it, because if it's an individual, I guess I might, if they're particularly negative in meetings, for example, I might do things like say, thank you for your contribution. I really appreciate that you're finding this very difficult. I wonder what other views there are in the team, so that we look for ways to bring out different perspectives. I'm actually keen to hear what other people's perspective is there. So you've got somebody who's very negative, and we know we've all of people worked with them. Great. Somebody said it's important to explore what people think as well as feel. Absolutely. I've talked a lot about feelings that reflect my own bias, of course. And actually, for people, their thinking, their perspectives, what they see, their added value can be very powerful in that situation. Yeah, and we should be asking, what do you think and what do you feel, both in perspective. Good. If there are no other questions, we'll draw to a close. There's still some time to type in any questions if you have them. But just a final plug from me, we have the next cohort of our coach certification program. We're now taking applications for, and it starts on the 18th of September. It's running on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Singapore time. For those of you who are new to us and don't know about it, the program is focused on coaching at work and in organisations, and is very practice-based. And we do it in an online platform, not this one. We use Zoom, which offers a very interactive opportunity for lots of group practice and conversation. And we have students from all around the world. We deliver it in APAC and EU time zones, and with a wide range of people from bits of the organisation. There were a lot of HR practitioners, but also a lot of people from a range of functions, HR, finance, legal. So if you're interested, please do reach out to me or the team. And yeah, so other than that, I'd like to say a big thank you for joining me today on a Friday, to wish you all a lovely weekend, and I hope you find time to pause and step back from this ongoing pressure, and also take time to help others to do that. Thank you very much.